Syypä saada tehdä vasta. As the chair appointed by the Academy Board at the Sibelius Academy, I hereby declare the public examination of Krishna Nagaraja's demonstration of proficiency open. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the public examination of the artistic doctoral degree of Krishna Nagaraja. My name is Saija-Leena Rantanen. I am the head of the Mutri Doctoral School and Research Unit, and I act as the chair of this event. The doctoral candidate, Krishna Nagaraja, has prepared his degree in Mutri Doctoral School, Folk Music Doctoral Program, and the title of his doctoral project is Polska Travels, Composing at the Crossroads in Search for an Itinerant Musical Home. And the examiners here on stage with me today are members of the Artistic Committee, Doctor of Music Sinikka Kontio, who is also the chair of the Artistic Committee. Then we have composer and master of music Olli Virtaperko, Doctor of Music Professor Kristiina Ilmonen, Doctor of Music Jouko Kyhälä, and Doctor of Music Assi Karttunen, who is also one of the thesis examiners, together with docent Doctor of Philosophy Thomas von Wachenfeld. Also, a member of the Artistic Committee, violinist and Master of Music Greta-Maria Kentala could not be present in today's event. And next, the doctoral candidate will give his lectio precursoria.
Honored Chair, honored Artistic Committee, honored thesis examiners, dear audience present here and online, it is, I believe, for the sake of art that we are gathered here today. And it is for the sake of art that I would like to present my doctoral project largely with the help of musical examples, also indulging perhaps in a little poetry. My artistic research, as you can see from this very big screen behind my back, is entitled Polska Travels, Composing at the Crossroads. And with my speech today, I wish to unpack the essence of this title and introduce a few of the topics that it suggests. The project included 4 live concerts, 1 CD recording, and a written thesis. All of these components revolve around the Polska, one of the most popular folk dance tune types in the Nordic countries. The family of Polska tunes originated at least roughly 400 years ago in Central Europe, probably. It has therefore traveled a very long way through space and time before it evolved in the variety of Nordic local types we enjoy today. This history of border crossing suggested one of the main underlying ideas of my doctoral project, that of boundaries. I would now like to digress for a short while and reflect on what boundaries might mean to us today, how we perceive them. For example, this is how state borders between Saharan countries look like on a map. And this is how they look like in reality, for the most. And this next picture shows the separate components of a phenomenon that we normally perceive as a whole, namely white light. And lastly, moving on to musical boundaries. This might be a normal sight in record shops nowadays, so music that's labeled according to genres and put on specific labels, on specific shelves, sorry. But we might ask ourselves, where is this music really processed, recognized, and hopefully enjoyed? Right here, in the mind of the listener. Boundaries, I think, are lines that we construct in order to orientate ourselves in the vast otherness that seemingly surrounds us. But we might find ourselves asking ourselves whether these boundaries are imagined or whether they're real, or more importantly, if we are so distinctly separated from the vast otherness that seemingly surrounds us. In my research, I tried not to ignore those boundaries and, on the contrary, to zoom into them. And the closer I looked, the more I realized that they were not the sharp, definite lines that I initially thought. If magnified through a microscope, they revealed another unexpected nature, that of a field, where different identities could flow into one another. Furthermore, and what is more interesting in my opinion, these borders areas crossed with many other paths and created several intersections. And those in-between spaces where the travels of the Polska met my own personal musical travels came to be the crossroads, where I could dwell for some time, make myself at home, and hopefully express what I saw artistically. The theme of traveling, as you might have guessed by now, is another crucial component of my project. Traveling helps us find our way in the intricate multiplicity of cultural paths that is offered to us basically on a daily basis. A similar itinerant approach was applied to my research, where quite a few elements were removed, added, and changed along the journey. I will now share with you a video with excerpts from my first and from my last doctoral concerts, just to show you how my arrangements and compositions changed throughout the 5 years that separate the two events. Looking back, now that all is hopefully done, I find myself saying with the poet Antonio Machado, "Traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. As you walk, you make your own road, and when you look back, you see the path you will never travel again. Traveler, there is no road, only a ship's wake on the sea." This video depicts the arch in which my exploration of the Polska in particular and of folk music in general took place. From my standpoint as a Baroque viola player and as an arranger, I set sail to discover the early Baroque Polish-German origins of the Polska and its diffusion into Sweden, Finland and Norway. The knowledge I gathered was used as the basis for the arrangement and composition of music that itself travelled farther and farther away from the genres that had inspired it, accessing spaces where labels were hopefully no longer necessary or even relevant. Now, if we think about artistic research projects, we might know that generally they are characterized by an object of study, a perspective of the researcher, a research question which connects the researcher to their object, a methodology to fulfill the endeavor, and a field, a context, where the project is inscribed and nurtured. During the Polska Travels, the unfolding of the research itself suggested quite a few changes in many of these aspects. It is my intention now to describe the evolution of this process throughout the early, middle and final stages of the project. And well, to begin with, and to be quite honest, in my application for the doctoral studies, so it's back to 2015, 7 years ago, time really flies. The title of my project did not even have the word Polska in it. It just read Folk Baroque New Early Music. And in fact, back then my aim was the investigation of possible bridges between the performance practices of folk music and Baroque music. But at any rate, Polska as the research object entered the picture more specifically a few months later, basically, while I was preparing the first doctoral concert entitled Polska Travels Finnish Folk Music for a Baroque Orchestra. The first part of the title, of course, gave the whole project its current denomination. I wanted to connect the genres of Baroque and folk music. And not only that, I wanted to infuse them with a little bit of my own 21st century musicianship, of course. And therefore, I decided to intervene directly on the music that I was going to play. In other words, to be less of a performer and a bit more of an arranger and a composer. I decided to work with Polska tunes from ancient sources and arrange them into a full-length orchestral suite in Baroque style, something that I admit is rather anachronistic, but still. Performed on period instruments by an orchestra formed but mostly by Baroque musicians, but also by a few folk players also versed in classical music. The first movement of the suite is a typical Baroque overture, with a grand opening in French style, followed by a fugue that eventually lands on a grave and pompous epilogue. I chose to share this piece because it exemplifies my early treatment of folk material. It is based on two fragments of two tunes. The first tune is called, forgive my Finnish pronunciation, Mäkeläisen tulomarssi, which we can hear interpreted by Arto Järvelä. The second one is called Kahman Antin Polska, interpreted here by Petri Prauda. And this is what I did with them. besides or despite the folk baroque experiments, already in the first concert, the temptation to walk beyond the framework of early music was too strong to be resisted. I wanted to venture into free composition, and as a homage to the eastern side of Finnish folk music, namely the one that's connected to the runolaulu tradition, I wrote a concerto for the iconic Finnish jouhikko and baroque orchestra, where the folk tradition is present as a source of inspiration below the surface, but the material is entirely my own. I should probably elucidate the reasons for the title, The 2.5 Seasons. Well, the title alluded at the fact that to my Southern European eyes, Finnish seasons don't really add up to 4, to be honest. That they seem to consist of 2 actual seasons, like a very long autumn that deteriorates into an even longer, interminable winter, and 2 seasons that are so short that, well, they added up to half a season. So an incredibly short spring bursting into a fantastic but painfully short summer. Let's hope that the next one is not so short, actually. So the next video displays glimpses of the winter and then the passage into the spring and the very conclusion of the summer. The art of arrangement involved a good deal of recontextualization of a tune for me. During the middle stage of the research, the limits of the arrangements were therefore pushed further and further as it turned more and more towards recomposing or actually composing music. In my second concert, Polska Travels 2, Swedish folk music for baroque orchestra, rather unimaginative title, I'm sorry, folk elements were not simply transplanted into new soil, but also modified almost to the point of becoming something else. Where is the line that separates the original from this else? How far can we stretch the boundaries of a musical item before it loses its identity? Such were the questions that I had in mind when I approached the peculiar rhythms of the polskas from Western Sweden. The basis for a concerto that I wrote for Mats Edén and his 5-string viola d'amore. Gränser, borders in English, takes traditional folk material and reshapes it from the core, especially in the final movement, Över gränsen. The piece explores different types of boundaries, such as between Polska types, between nations, and between arrangement and composition. This next short excerpt is a sample of the whole piece, taken from the first performance in 2018. As my research drew to a close, the reflection on the idea of boundaries and the artistic practice inspired by them revealed to me that the true target of my attention lay precisely on those intersections where several paths crossed and originated a space that was part of the individual lines, of course, but took its new identity from their dynamic synthesis. It was the footprints on the path behind my shoulders, just to quote the poet once again, that had led me to that realization. Indeed, most often our steps reveal to us sceneries we did not even realize we were painting. It was only through the folk baroque experiments that I realized that my research had to travel further. Only by exploring the practice of arrangement did I become aware of the strong urge to use composition as the main tool to construct my own musical homes, while dwelling in the interstitial spaces between different genres and disciplines. So in short, the method had turned from performance practice and arrangement to composition. The context, the research field from folk baroque to contemporary music. And my perspective as a researcher had shifted from performer-arranger to composer, and the object of the research from the Polska alone to the crossroads between Polska and other elements. The same crossroads now appears in the title of the project. Polska Travels, composing at the crossroads, is now fully embraced as a further reaching project where composition is used to hybridize genres and influences, not only in a way I compose while I am at the crossroads, but I also compose the crossroads itself. So, after many redefinitions, the research question was finally formulated as such. Composing at the crossroads. How to use composition as a tool to construct an interstitial musical home between different genres and influences. The doctoral piece that, in my opinion, answers this question best is Stringar for string quartet, premiered at my last concert in May 2021 by the string quartet Metaphor. It was also recorded in a recently released album that represents my fifth and final artistic outcome. The CD also includes a piece I wrote and performed actually on that very instrument that is sitting on the chair at the moment, so the Hardanger fiddle. And by the way, the CD is available for purchase today. If anybody's interested, outside this hall there's a table with the thesis book and the CD, in case you're interested. So the Stringar Quartet is based on Norwegian folk repertoire, mixed with elements as far as art music, South Indian rhythms, and why not, even progressive metal. Since most of my examples today are last movements from my compositions, the next video is going to be no exception, and will display the final part of the quartet, entitled Valdres Springar, or Springar from the region of Valdres. The Springar, by the way, is the Norwegian cousin of the Polska. And some Springars from the region of Valdres are indeed very special tunes. They are said to possess magical, almost trance-like properties and powers. They are called dawn tunes, grå lysingene, for their connection to the hours between night and day. These tunes are featured in a written account by folk tune collector Einar Övergård from the early 1900s, where he describes a folk dance party at a farmhouse taking place throughout the whole night. The formal architecture of my piece is entirely based on this tale. It's a bit long, maybe, but still I think it's incredibly evocative, so I would like to read it with you before we listen to the piece. So you've got to picture the scene. We are on a mountain slope, it's very late at night, there's a farmhouse, there's a dancing happening. The guests have been dancing a lot, they have been eating a lot, and let's face it, they have been drinking quite a lot. So many of them are actually sleeping. But then, as the first light from the east announces the new day, the sound of the fiddler tuning his strings spreads through the hall. He strikes a fairy-like chord, and the tired guests shake off their sleepiness with a start. They recognize those tones. The dawn tune is coming. The fiddler begins to play. The strange melody electrifies everyone. Nobody can sit still, not the old, not the young. Everyone must now come forward and join. Never has the dance had such life as now. The playing grows more and more intense. Suddenly a loud cry of joy bursts forth from the Valdesian fiddler. He stamps his foot strongly on the floor. Dust clouds float towards the ceiling through their veil and the tobacco smoke in the half-dimmed light of a lamp. One can see the spirited silhouettes moving in a swirling dance. The fiddler then falls silent. The wild, loud energy that had reigned earlier, summoned by the dawn tune, has now settled down. One after the other, the guests drag themselves home, and the dance is over. In Waldorfspringar, I borrowed the hypnotic, repetitive character of the dawn tunes to compose my own long Springar melody, which is embedded in a big arch that raises from silence and to silence returns. I will now give you the full performance of the movement as the conclusion of my Lectio Precursoria. I would like to thank you for bearing with me and my attempt to explain how composition has helped me in dealing with boundaries, in understanding boundaries, and in using them to my own advantage in the construction of that temporary musical home that is for me my string quartet, Stringar. Boundaries, definitions, labels, I think, are maybe imaginary, but they're very useful in order to map the territory where we are moving all the time. They are, in a way, models of reality, not to be confused with reality itself. And realizing this, in my opinion, is now more important than ever. honored committee, dear audience, thank you very much for your attention, and I think we may now proceed to the discussion of the thesis. Thank you very much. I hereby call upon you, honored artistic committee and thesis examiners, appointed by the Academy Board at the Sibelius Academy, to evaluate my doctoral demonstration of proficiency and to present the critical comments you deem it deserves.
Honorable Chair, dear doctoral candidate, examination statement of Krishna Nagaraja, artistic demonstration as part of his demonstration of proficiency in the Doctor of Music degree at the Arts Study Program. Polska Travels, composing at the Crossroads, in search for an itinerant musical home. Sibelius Academy, Helsinki, 20th June 2022. I want to congratulate Krishna Nagaraja for completing his journey towards the artistic demonstration of proficiency for Doctor of Music degree. On behalf of the artistic committee, I and the other members thank you, Krishna, for the exhaustive background information about your concerts, the research with related materials we have received during your artistic journey, and the music we have been privileged to hear. In his artistic doctoral project, Nagaraja delves into the world of Polska through the study of manuscripts, looking for inspiration in the music of the Baroque era. He has explored the folk music archives in Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and arranged his musical discoveries in the Baroque style. Inspired by these discoveries, he has also written completely new music. He has composed and arranged music for his concerts, led his concert ensembles, and played in concert lineups, along with the best of musicians whom he invited to join in. Nagaraja's research question was, composing at the Crossroads, how can composition be used as a tool to construct an interstitial musical home between different genres and influences? His project included 4 concerts and a CD. The amount of personal creation, including all background research, notation writing, and band leading, is enormous. I dare say this project's artistic scope is more than sufficient. Nagaraja has achieved all this in 5 years, demonstrating extremely efficient use of time. The first concert, Polska Travels, Finland, Finnish folk music for a Baroque orchestra, took place in January 2017 in Helsinki Music Center, Kamerate Hall. Peter Spiski conducted the Sibelius Academy Folk Baroque Orchestra. Arto Järvelä on violin and Ilkka Heinonen on jouhikko played solos. James Kahani conducted the jouhikko concert. Played on early musical instruments, the concert program was extensive. The first piece in the concert was a German side, followed by a Finnish side, and Lappfärdshet. For the concert, Nagaraja also wrote a concerto for jouhikko to 2.5 seasons, concerto for fiddle, jouhikko, and strings. The piece, titled East-West, included improvisatory elements according to Nagaraja. He aimed to arrange ancient folk tunes for a Baroque orchestra in the traditional Baroque style, write compository music, contemporary music for Baroque instruments and introduce folk music-based pieces to musicians with little or no experience playing folk music. The second concert was titled Polska Travels Sweden, Swedish folk music for a Baroque orchestra. While preparing the second artistic component of his degree, Nagaraja went on a student exchange trip in Sweden and spent a year researching traditional tunes from the regions of Western and developing his appreciation of Polska. The concert was given in Copenhagen, Denmark, and in Malmö, Sweden, in May 2018. Like the first concert, it began with 18th century Baroque music, this time by Handel. The concert continued with two compositions by Nagaraja, Swedish and Grenzer. Concert was 5-string viola d'amore and strings. The music was performed by Hurra Baroque Orchestra with students from Malmö and Copenhagen Music Academies, with Peter Spiske as the concertmaster, Mats Edén as the 5-string viola d'amore soloist, and James Kahane as the conductor. Nagaraja played viola in the concert. At this stage of his doctoral studies, Nagaraja became more focused on his role as an evolving composer, paying less attention to his role as a performer. The third concert, Polska Travels, Baroque Roots, took place in Musiikkitalo Kamerata Hall in September 2018. The concert featured a group of 5-string instrumentalists and one harpsichordist playing Baroque music. As a member of the group, Nagaraja also led the ensemble. He arranged music for the concert as well. The repertoire consisted of music by late 17th and early 18th century composers. In this concert, Nagaraja had 3 points of focus. First, he explored on a musicological level the confluence of composed music and folk music in the Baroque era. Second, he compared original manuscripts to their later editions. Third, he reflected on the performance of folk music in the Baroque style. The last chase of Krishna Nagaraja's Polska Travels took place in Music Center Organ Hall in May 2021. The fourth concert was titled Polska Travels Part 4, Tales from Norway. As a result of the COVID-19 restrictions, only the committee attended the concert live, but it was streamed online. For practical reasons, the Norwegian suite for solo hardanger fiddle was partly performed in Norwegian hardanger violinist Vegard Vordal on a pre-recorded video, partly by Nagaraja himself live at the concert. The string quartet metaphor performed Strängar for string quartet. Nagaraja's method for working on a Norwegian set was to write for the instrument and to test ideas and improvise on his hardanger violin. According to Nagaraja, the question of the scope of exploring a tradition before using it in one's work remained open, with no definite answer. He wrote, however, the questions of how deeply a composer should study a tradition before being allowed to use it in their work remains open and arguably unanswered. The final fifth artistic component of Nagaraja's doctoral work is the recording of the pieces from the fourth concert, which included the string quartet Strängar performed by the executive megaphor and a Norwegian suite for hardanger fiddle with which Krishna Nagaraja performed himself. Nagaraja produced the recording, and Tales from Norway is his first release as a composer and solo performer. The committee consisted of experts in folk music, Baroque music, and composing. Next, I will refer to excerpts from our feedback, discussions, and the written statements. The results of the enormous creative process presented in the first concert gave us an impression of what to expect of the research project. The committee was delighted with Krishna Nagaraja's fusion of Baroque and folk music and noted that Baroque music is a fusion as such. The committee enjoyed Nagaraja's extensive pieces and had a lively discussion about the Jouhikko concert. Nagaraja succeeded in introducing idiomatic Jouhikko techniques and timbres to baroque music. According to the committee, the decision to end the concert with a piece containing improvisational elements was great and brave. The committee's feedback included a proposal for Nagaraja to write smaller scale music for smaller ensembles. This wish came true in the later concerts. Only 2 committee members, Ilmonen and Kyhälä from Finland, attended the second degree concert in Malmö's St. Andreas Kyrka in 2018. To assist with the assessments, Sven Albeck from Sweden joined the committee. We thank him for his well-informed assistance. The Swedish suite continued Nagaraja's development of his composer's toolkit by developing deep into traditional folk music material, enriching it with baroque and classical contemporary elements and trying to introduce as much folk playing understanding and as possible to the classically trained musicians within the limited rehearsal time and with conventional methods, such as notation. The musical material of the set was well orchestrated and diligently interpreted by the 13-member orchestra of early music students from Malmö and Copenhagen, providing them in Krishna's own words with an opportunity to get acquainted with folk music presented in a language they are already comfortable with. Gränsar was based on traditional tunes from the regions of Western. Nagaraja worked towards providing a notation that could help the classical trained orchestra players understand the feeling of these rhythms through articulation marks, slurs and bowings. While Mats Edén, as the soloist, was naturally on top of the phrasing of the piece's folk elements. The rhythmical material's complexity was challenging for the orchestra players. Although the performance was good enough to convince one of the quality of the work, the examination committee members could not help but imagine how the music would sound if folk music professionals performed it. As a composition, it indicated an impressive development in Nagaraja's compositional handwriting and personal style, providing exciting views of the next steps. Kristiina Ilmonen stated that in all, that concert was an intriguing exploration, a laboratory of research into the very core of Nagaraja's doctoral aim, being in the crossroads of musical traditions as a composer and performer, but also witnessing the challenges of transmitting the tacit knowledge of a style to another field specialists. The third concert only included works by baroque composers. Although the committee liked the program, some of the committee members believed it included too many works at the same time. For Nagaraja, this concert presented an opportunity to explore the roots of baroque music and to lead. In the concert, Nagaraja played and led the group, which is typical for a baroque ensemble. The committee stated that Nagaraja was a competent leader with a natural and vivid leading style. It featured some favorable theatrical elements in resemblance of the Swedish folk musician Mats Edén, who appeared in the second concert. In his artistic process for this concert, Nagaraja reached a profound level. The music was enjoyable and poor, and the changes in tempo, for example, were well justified and formulated. In his essays, Nagaraja reflected on his role as a composer, arranger, performer and leader on more than one occasion. In this context, Jouko Kyhälä reminded us that in folk music, the performer and the composer are the same person, and that the performer is the master of the moment. In the fourth concert, Nagaraja addressed the problematics of notating folk music, a tradition that is, by default, transmitted by ear. how can one transmit folk music's essential stylistic and expressive features through notation? The works written for the concert addressed this question, and they provided perspectives on and solutions to the question. The problem with performing folk music based on written notation is that it can't fully transmit information about rhythms, melodic variations, also improvisation, or the details of agogic variation. Nagaraja had chosen to notate his works according to the Western art music traditions. However, his method included the ability to communicate with the musicians verbally and musically. In this manner, Nagaraja was able to direct the music performances in a direction that enabled folk music expression and his personal ideas for specific musical pieces in a natural and communicative manner. This ability was well displayed in Metaphor's interpretation of Stringer. It featured natural rhythmic variation, and the interpretation's affective elements were harmonious. Olli Virtaperko praised the fourth concert for its more finished and ambitious compositions, with more major expressions than in the previous concerts. This concert highlighted Nagaraja's instrumentalism. Although he was forced to play one movement of the solo suite for Hardanger violin himself, for the committee it proved to be the most interesting contribution in the concert. The performance was described as intense. Nagaraja was able to appreciate and interpret his texture exactly as he had meant it to be interpreted. Norwegian Sid and Vanderslot reminded the committee of a pre-Baroque music. Gartenen even compared the music to 13th century French polymetrics. Metaphor was able to convey Nagaraja's musical ideas faithfully and accurately. Nagaraja's strengths include the use of polyrhythms and additive rhythms. Kristina Ilmanen summarized the concert as follows. Stringer and a Norwegian suite are the artistic peak of the whole doctoral journey. The recording, Tales from Norway. It is noteworthy that for his fourth concert and the recording of Stringer, Nagaraja was able to secure such internationally top-level performers as Metaphor. The quartet's performance indeed meets the piece's challenges wonderful and provides for the fascinating, clear and dynamic interpretation of a beautiful piece, an original hybrid of folk and contemporary elements. The task of performing a Norwegian suite on the Hardanger fiddle for the recording was not a modest challenge. However, as Ilmanen states, Nagaraja manages to perform his own composition with apparent ease, expressing the piece's complexities with clarity, grace and sensitivity. The possibility to publish the materials on CD was a great addition to the doctoral project. Nagaraja performing his own suite is the most beautiful ending for the whole project, but also a beginning for a beautiful career as a Crossroads composer and performer, Ilmanen continues. Committee member Greta-Maria Kentala described the music on the recording. The quartet is super. Resembling Bartók's work, the score is colorful and moderately melodic, and right from the start, Nagaraja is in the business grooving to complex rhythms. The quartet features exciting fields that vibrate in polyrhythms. At times, we hear Polska influences, at times rhythms and melodies reminiscent of India. The music varies from dance forms to sudden, extremely minimalistic sections. Krishna has a brilliant and distinctive style of writing harmonies. They sound modern, but always include a modal undertone that adds a folk music-like tone to the music. After hearing these works, the committee believes that Krishna Nagaraja's work has major significance. He is a baroque musician, well versed in early music styles. He parallels the complex and varying Hardanger Polska rhythms with the rhythmic ornamentations of early baroque music. His background in early dance repertoires is a solid foundation for exploring the traditional folk fiddle groove. He has a sensitive musical ear based on the descriptive aesthetics of early music and definitely a greater ability to distinguish between various styles than the average musician. In folk music, the core know-how is usually transmitted by ear. However, this transmittal is not natural or even possible for all musicians. For all musicians, Krishna's project provides a profound understanding of the essential nature and phenomena of folk music. Moreover, his compositions are original. The committee believes that the most difficult elements for most composers, control and development of the material transitions and achieving balance between the music's temporal elements, are also targets for development for Nagaraja. The committee was delighted to notice that the technical and artistic levels in Nagaraja's compositions has substantially improved in a short period of time. Olli Virtaperko believes Nagaraja has all that is needed for working as a composer and encourages him to continue his composition studies. What then has Krishna Nagaraja achieved on his musical journey? He has the ability to create and innovate music. He knows how to communicate his musical ideas through rigid Western notation and through musical interaction. Nagaraja is a brilliant musician and a musical leader. He has excellent working methods and organizational skills. As a student, he has been quick and responsible. As a musician, he has a long international track record. Krishna is Italy's and India's gift to music, and in this project, particularly to Polska.
Examination statement on Krishna Nagaraja's thesis as part of his demonstration of proficiency in the Doctor of Music degree at the Arts Study program. Krishna's dissertation, Polska Travels, composing at the Crossroads in search for an itinerant musical home, is a well-conducted study which finds its origins in the studies of the commonalities that exist between the Polska dance in early classical music and Nordic folk tradition. A reading of the present dissertation is a bit like experiencing Quentin Tarantino's movie From Dusk Till Dawn from 1996. It begins in a fairly traditional musicological tradition where Krishna gives a thoughtful and appealing allegorical exposition of his own life as a musician, which he connects in several ways with the Polska's somewhat restless and eclectic life and history. And the very concept of eclectic is something that recurrently comes to my mind while reading Krishna's dissertation. There's a strength in Krishna's seemingly wide open intellect and ability to associate. This gives the study an undeniable aura of academic innovation, even though the research is based on an ancient material where the Nordic brands and types of Polska is accompanied by the South Indian conical tradition. But to also get acquainted with the progressive rock and hard rock of the 20th and 21st centuries in the form of Frank Zappa, Mattias Eklund and Meshuggah, through the conical and the intricate late medieval Ars Nova music. All this is merged in the composition Stringar, which is the dissertation's main research object. I would like to emphasize my appreciation for the systematically in-depth musicological and artistic research project that Krishna has carried out. The result is a well-composed string quartet that unashamedly finds its nourishment in what appear to be disparate musical tradition, but which Krishna, with his unconditional approach, well-developed analytical ability and artistry, has managed to combine into a meaningful whole. My overall impression after reading Krishna's dissertation is that he points out that art and science do not in any way have to live as separate entities when the artistic process, in this case Stringar, also works as a method or a prism for deepening and the understanding of the parts and components that underlies it. In other words, like the Renaissance artist's discovery of the camera obscura or the central perspective, Krishna has used art to develop understanding and knowledge also in other scientific disciplines. I would therefore recommend Krishna Nagaraja's thesis Polska Travels, Composing at the Crossroads, in search for an itinerant musical home to be accepted as a written part of the demonstration of doctoral proficiency. Thank you.
Examination statement on Krishna Nagaraja's thesis as a part of his demonstration of proficiency in the Doctor of Music degree at the Arts Study program. Nagaraja's artistic doctoral thesis is a result of demanding artistic research process combining rigorous artistic practices of composing, artistic direction and musicianship with research skills. Typically for artistic research, Nagaraja's thesis encompasses a multitude of artistic material, history, theoretical frames of reference and outcomes. Nagaraja finds a thought-through balance between a theory and practice, and he is able to come up with important and up-to-date results as a composer, artistic researcher, and as a performing artist developing his own field of expertise. The results are his intelligent ways of defining the hybridity of his own musical language, connecting and embedding several other musical languages. He analyzes maturely questions on historical authenticity, origin, tradition, nationality, multinationality, intergenre, and interdisciplinarity. However, what makes his doctoral study so special is the fact that he explores these questions also within his compositions and in the performed music. Furthermore, he introduces a new idea, a musical home, which is temporary and itinerant. The fluidity of these ideas is far from being musically homeless or disoriented. Instead, he explores and defines the new reality of the 24th century musician and composer traveling around the world and experiencing and embodying several musical cultures. The chosen words, temporary and itinerant, are describing something in fluctuation, something happening dynamically as a movement, something which is not experienced as static, but rather as morphing, changing smoothly from one form to another in small gradual steps. These words are taken to the title of the thesis with a reason. The research question and the challenge for the composer have been articulated in the introduction. How to compose a musical home at the crossroads of different elements and influences. The hybridity of the musical language connects different musical idioms like elements of the Norwegian hardanger fiddle repertory, progressive metal music, Indian rhythms, and Western art music. Afterwards, Nagaraja deals with the origin of the Polska tradition and finds his way in terms of the ideas of historically informed performance and ethnomusicology. He dissects the large range of different Polska genres, origins, dialects, and variations from the 17th century up to the 19th century, which is valuable already as such. Then he explores the complexities of the meter, time signatures, patterns, questions of undivided beat, hypermeasure, polyrhythm, polymeter, all of this necessary and relevant for the substance of his study. He goes on to explain why the rhythmical deviations from something which is experienced as normal can be artistically inspiring, and compares these phenomena with the ones in the field of visual arts, playing with unrealistic proportions or perspective. The analysis Nagaraja gives on the tactus questions of the barrel alignment, time signature, uneven meters, and rhythmical patterns of early Italian Renaissance and Baroque compositions, such as in the works composed by Loisy-Compère, Rossino Mantovano, and Giovanni Battista Fontana, are especially enjoyable. From there, Nagaraja proceeds to explain and analyze similar rhythmical elements in the Konakol tradition, the rhythmic language of South India, and finds the reasons for this intellectual leap for vernacular poetry, which is combining the oral traditions of so-called early music of these different cultures. This could be venturesome for many researchers, but in Nagaraja's case, the solution makes sense. The whole section, written on rhythm, is convincing. Later on, Nagaraja describes the hybrid and itinerant elements in his composition, Stringar. Nagaraja is like a Polska, and I quote, "The Polska displays a long and often little-known history of migration, evolution, contamination, and crossing of the geographical and social boundaries." End of quote. Thus, the thesis is truly describing an artistic transformation. Not only the written text is transformational, but the composed music is also testifying a change in the musical expression and delivery. Typically, for artistic research, the results and outcomes are artistic, and in this case, they can be heard in the music and understood conceptually with the help of the written part of the Nagaraja's doctoral study. Therefore, it is my delight to recommend Krishna Nagaraja's thesis, Polska Travels, Composing at the Crossroads, in search for itinerant musical home, to be accepted as a written part of the demonstration of doctoral proficiency. Thank you.
Esteemed Chair. Hello. Esteemed Chair and members of the Artistic Committee, esteemed thesis examiners, I thank you for your statements and comments on my doctoral artistic and written work. Your valuable insight enlightens my own view of my research project and prepares the ground for the discussion that is now going to follow. Thank you very much.
In the concerts, we heard many contemporary compositions too. After all of this, as a composer, do you feel now free from the folk and baroque music traditions? Yes or no, but how and why you feel so free or not? What will be your musical home?
Being free from something or being free to do something, are they the same thing? This recalls a reflection that I recently made while reading Zygmunt Bauman's Liquid Modernity, which was an eye-opening moment in my life. So I actually have to thank Thomas von Wachenfeld, Docent von Wachenfeld, sorry, for recommending the book to me, because that was a compendium of all the concepts that I later understood I had been throwing into my own research. When Bauman talks about being free in liquid modernity, we might actually discuss this concept later, but in a nutshell, one thing is being free to do something, so we are in our modern days we are enjoying a very high degree of freedom to study, freedom to travel, and so on. But what are we free from? So I'm going to answer your question, I swear, but I just want to take long circles before I do it. The increased amount of freedom also brought an increased amount of individuality, I think, in our modern times, which means that we might also be freer from our neighbors, from our other fellow human beings. This is interesting because we're living in times when we're seemingly all connected, but are we really? So before I digress too much, I was actually riding my bus on this very morning to come here, and everybody, of course, we were all strangers on the bus, right? But everybody was either chatting with somebody on their phones or listening to music. They were isolated. I wasn't, because I don't have an internet connection outside my house. So I was watching the scene and realizing that being connected on that level doesn't necessarily mean that I'm connected with strangers when I meet them. So, going back to your question, what am I free from and what am I free to do? So I guess the last part of the question regards what am I free to do now, what I want, what my next temporary musical homes will be like. In the first place, I have a couple of commissions that I should probably think about from tomorrow onwards. But in terms of style, of finding my own identity, I just carry on the line that was suggested by Maestro Virta Perco during the feedback from the first concert. I should write as much as possible my own material. It's like the Antonio Machado poem suggested, we make our own way as we walk. So as much as I walk as a composer, no matter if I'm still reticent in using this term, refer to me, but I am embracing this right now. So I am going to write more, to conceive more music, and to bring it back to the performance level, which has largely been neglected in the last, at least in the last couple of years, also for pandemic reasons. So this is just to answer your question from the freedom to do something sort of perspective. What am I free from? So what is my relationship with folk and Baroque music, for example, going to be? I think I want to recuperate once again the performative side of this relationship. On a compositional level, I think I've reached a space where I know that I like musical genres, but that's not where I dwell. The whole concept between that title is to make the in-between space the actual ground for composition. So there is a way in those intersections where if you really magnify the image, you don't really know what is what anymore, which is which anymore. And this may be a slightly romanticized view of scientific observation, but bear with me. This is also my maybe idealized, but actually very, very practical also way to go about composing music. So the answer to this question is I don't know. So I don't know, meaning not that I'm not informed about what I would like to do, but in terms of I would like to carry on this way, because for me it's inevitable as a person in the first place. I am a crossroads person. I think we all are in some way. We are crossroads of our own history or histories, our past, our present, the people that we meet, the cultures that we are exposed to, the music that we hear, and as composers, maybe Maestro Virta Perco can actually interact with me on that. We are constantly navigating this field of possibilities, especially now in the internet era. I can easily, click on my mouse and listen to Mattias Eklund or Meshuggah or Perutinus or Shostakovich or Maestro Virta Perco or any other composer very easily. How does this influence my music making? It does in a way that on a very deep level, and articulating my thoughts in this writing, in this written thesis, forced me to understand what I was doing and what I want to do now, which is still provoke, create ever new crossroads with other types of music maybe. There's a lot still to discover, just to be a bit more practical, a bit more specific in my answer. Regarding, for example, Swedish and Norwegian music, I mean, this instrument is just unbelievably rich in repertoire. Every time I listen to something, I find myself, oh man, I should really, spend my whole lifetime on this Springar, or I should go to Sweden and work with Mats Edén. I have had the luxury of collaborating with all these great musicians and people. Mats Edén, Peter Spiski, Arto Järvelä in Finland, Vegard Vårdal in Norway, and so on. I would like to collaborate a bit more, because this has been a rather lonely trip. I hope this answers partly your question.
I have some observations of string quartet and possibly a question also. But as a composer, I'm interested in how the larger forms, how the continuum of music, how it functions, and how well it goes on, and the drama aspect of music. And your harmonic language is very plain. It's not the major issue in your in Stringer or Norwegian suits. And so you have chosen a kind of model approach which is I understand it very clearly because your emphasis is on rhythm and meter, and the way you create dissonances and conflicts and tensions in music. In Stringer, it seems to be purely on rhythmical and metrical ground. So you put motives together and make rhythmical dissonance and metric dissonance with these choices, and that's basically your main method of drama, of creating drama in music, and so it works well to a certain extent. You are able to, you certainly are a man of development and transition. You like to develop your material. You like to sort of go deeper to your material, and I do appreciate that. But at the same time, when the harmonic elements are very, like, should I say, tame or very easy listening, they are like soft cloud which embraces you. I find that the rhythmical treatment might not provide enough drama, and that's one thing I'm slightly puzzled. And the other issue is that when you declared yourself your intention to write a major work in the field of classical music, the string quartet plus 20-minute piece, which means that the individual movements are long, and so the way you create a long line, like a continuum of one single work, when you are relying on rhythmical development and the rhythmical kind of dissonance treatment, it brings you to a certain point, but as you are not dealing with harmony, like functional harmony, there are hints of you do chord progressions, and harmony is certainly an element there, but you don't use it like deliberately, and you don't aim to use it as a major tool for creating the drama in your music. So to my ears and eyes, occasionally it gives the impression that when you have developed one theme or musical idea to the extent that you can bring it, so then you are kind of you don't have enough compositional tools to create a smooth transition to the different thing, and I sense the desire of doing so, that you really want it to have a kind of organic identity, but I think the lack of compositional tools, and I'm not referring to the skill level, but exactly the tools that you have in the world you have chosen, might not be sufficient. And it puzzled me a lot why I did like so much about the Norwegian suite and why I didn't like so much about Stringer. And it was only after reading your profound thesis that I realized that the role of rhythm, you say very little about harmony at all, and I do understand it, because in order for rhythmical complexities to flourish and to be distinguished and greatly observed, you need other space. There shouldn't be too much information, and I appreciate very much that idea. But still I feel that your choice of choosing a very soft harmony, like bourgeois dream, in very violent and energetic and lively rhythmical ideas, it's a kind of contradictionary starting point, which creates kind of, well, questions about the identity of the work. So I would like to ask, firstly, do you recognize these issues? And secondly, how do you feel that the choice of your harmonic language, or were you satisfied with the result in the case of Stringer, especially the movements 1 and 3?
The answer to the first question is yes, and the second answer is not really, not yet. So I totally recognize those issues, and you framed it perfectly. I don't have enough compositional tools to go that direction. For example, I see that my teacher Eero Hämeenniemi is here in the hall today, and I think we've discussed the possibility to go in other directions, apart from the rhythmical issues, but in terms of my musical thought, the way I develop things, the way I transition things, and the way I construct the form. I build the overall form of a piece, not only of a piece, but as you very well mentioned, the entire quartet, for example, the entire suite or whatever it is. So in order to construct something, a musical home, but with a plan, with a credible sort of form that gives it stability, even if it's temporary. So absolutely. Speaking about harmony, yes, I am still searching for my own language. This is probably in my top 3 things to develop and study. And actually, going for 1 second back to Dr. Kontio's question regarding what my relation with folk sort of composition is going to be in the future, I want to take a break from modality, from sheer modality, because this is the basis for my harmonic, let's call it, language, for both for Stringer and for the Norwegian suite. Especially for Stringer, I chose to, even if I didn't have to, because a quartet is a quartet. I mean, the string quartet is made of violins and cellos and the viola. So there's no limitations to what you can do. And if you're using that instrument, especially in the tunings that I used, you are a bit limited in your harmonic choices, also because of the resonance strings. In the case of Stringer, I did have the choice. Obviously, I'm stating the obvious here. I decided to stick to a modality, to a very, very simple treatment of harmony, because this is how the original tunes, the original sound world that I started from was speaking to me. And once again, as you mentioned, just to stay focused on the rhythmical aspect. So yes, I am aware of those issues. I think I should focus on those, especially on the harmonic and on the formal issues that you underlined. And am I satisfied about the results that I see in both the Stringer? You mentioned the first and third movement of Stringer.
Yes, because in the second movement you're flirting with expressional tools of contemporary art music. That's a different issue. Yeah. We might talk about that in a dinner.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, even talking about, we talked about this during the feedbacks and also outside the feedbacks, the circular form, it's a very comfortable and nice way to end a piece, and I completely, honestly, openly admit it. I espoused this method because it simply worked, and it worked well in that case. In other pieces, actually, in the first movement of the quartet, it's not really circular, is it? Or in the second movement, it's not. In some ways, it is circular. In some other ways, it's just like this continuous progression that actually ends banging the forehead on the wall. But yes, formally speaking, I need to find a way where at least these three aspects, so the construction of the piece, the harmonic language, and the rhythmical aspect, well, let's add the melody on top of it, or any aspect, communicates to each other. Writing folk-inspired music, for the time being, due to my own compositional lack of tools, limited me a bit. So I listened to a lot of folk-inspired art music compositions, even from Nordic composers, contemporary or modern, and I was really, really admiring the level of bravery that they took in rethinking the folk through their own harmonic language, but they had developed a language anyways. Or I'm thinking of Szymanowski, for example, Harnasi, the ballet that made him famous as a folk-inspired composer, somebody who lived and studied the Polish traditions, which then he transformed into this half-an-hour ballet that he wrote. And that for me was really, really a revelatory moment, because the harmonies and the formal aspect is so tight, is so coherent. The road is long, the crossroads are all over the place, so these are excellent suggestions for, and they confirm my own view of myself. Long story short, regarding Stringer, I am satisfied, but I think I would like to go much further than that. I would like to explore more how much I can maybe even push the boundaries of the harmonic language of a musical tradition and see what happens. I was really tame, you are absolutely right. I was consciously so, because I wanted to really learn how to speak polymetrically. And this aspect, I think, in my humble opinion, is definitely something that I can take for granted in the piece, in Stringer, and also in the Norwegian suite. That is a bit more of a question of originality, because in the Norwegian suite, especially in the second and fourth movement, I use a lot of formulaic motifs that call for special rhythms, that call for special harmonies, and they need to stay there if I want to use them in their originality. So that's my comment. Thank you.
You mentioned that it was necessary for you as a method to compose these early folk baroque suites, and that you found actually your own way to how to compose music at the Crossroads. I was wondering what kind of effect your written work as a method had on your composing. You devoted quite a large portion of the thesis actually to analyze the metrical features and to analyze what kind of building blocks are there in the traditions you are using and so on. So how did this affect your composing, or have you seen yet the effect?
I think it affected the composition very deeply. Before even thinking about writing a string quartet or writing a suite for Harding-Fele solo, I remember spending several weeks, maybe several months, in the summer of 2019, I think, yes, listening to a lot of material, both traditional material from Norway and art music inspired by Norwegian folk material. And at the same time reading, for example, Mats Johansson's thesis and all the literature that I found online and in this institution. And it deepened my knowledge, needless to say. So I was learning a new language. I was getting into the grammar of that language, by means of theoretical literature written on that language. That was not enough, so I tried to embody the language by trying to speak it myself on the fiddle, especially for the Hardanger fiddle suite. That was not enough, of course, so I started listening and watching and asking people. So in this way I interdisciplinarily try to approach the necessary knowledge for the composition. How did it affect the actual notes that I wrote? Well, it's a potentially endless, bottomless discussion here, because every composer it's impossible to analyze to the finest detail how much your influences get into the actual sounds that you produce. But you can, of course, shed some light. Those theoretical essays, for example, deeply influenced the second movement of Stringa, so Telespringa. Telespringas are maybe the most and maybe still to a certain extent are the most foreign types of Springa and most flexible types of Springa that I encountered in the Norwegian Hardingfele tradition. And knowing how they work, how the idea of inferred meter was really enlightening. Knowing, and then going, thanks to this hermeneutical spiral sort of process where you zoom in and out of a picture, you have two polarities. So there's myself and the Telespringas, for example. I zoom into the Telespringas and then I understand that there's an ambiguity in meter, but what is meter then? So I go back somewhere else, the spiral is circulating, and I explore another area, which then redirects me to yet another area. So this constant spool, spinning of knowledge is what sparked many ideas in the piece. The same form, the same sequence of events that unfolds throughout the piece is largely the musical depiction of what I was reading in Mats Johansson's thesis, the concept of rhythmic reshaping, for example, the concept of rhythmic tolerance, this fantastic idea that he reports, quoting Ann Danielsen, Norwegian musicologist, who is persuaded that beat is not a point in time. We are normally, this is very typical of people who are used to a very, very strict and precise musical notation. We are bound to the idea that beat has an onset, and that's it. There's a line and there's a beat. According to Ann Danielsen, it's not exactly like that, especially in the field of folk music, where the melodic instruments are also the rhythm carriers. Because if I play my fiddle, there is a myriad of parameters that carry out the rhythm, that bring out the rhythm, as we all know. There's accentuation, the way I use the bow, the way I ornament, even the way I move, everything concurs to the same creation of, to the same performance of the meter. And that's not even the end of it, because then the meter has to be inferred by the listener. So I try to convey all of these ideas in one piece, and that's just one example. We can change the piece and talk about the Norwegian suite, for example. Reading this mammoth publication that Morten Levy wrote, The World of Gorlaus Slots, in 3 or 4 volumes, like some thousands of pages. And Gorlaus Slots are the basic material for nearly the whole of the Norwegian suite. Reading almost all of the books by Levy, and also inquiring in many other directions, told me that there are constituent principles in the construction of these tunes. So once again, I was learning a new language. I was learning Setesdalska, the language that they speak, the Viking language that they speak in Setesdal in Norway. And that was difficult, but I had pre-exposed myself to that. Once again, by getting into the fine grains of the language that I was exposed to and that I wanted to learn, gave me an idea of how I could use these structures to speak my own version of it. And my own version of it is partly the Ramestrots sort of tune construction, a motif that is repeated and then germinates into something else, that then is repeated and then germinates into something else, and so on and so forth. So something that grows organically within itself. That, for example, and the concept, the character of a Lyarslott or a Huldreslott or the myth of the Nyckeln, which deeply informs the narrative behind the second movement of the suite. All of this, of course, whenever is sedimented in my own musical being, and then I speak on behalf of that part of me, pulls everything that is not immediately belonging to that area with them, though, because I am one person. I'm not, hopefully, I'm not several musical characters. There's all of me when I play the suite, when I play, when I used to play my folk baroque experiments or my folk baroque arrangements and so on. So yeah, it's a gathered knowledge that as researchers we amass when we study a phenomenon, and that the great thing about artistic research is that you eventually translate that into your own language. And this is how I am still trying to trace my own paths in the field of grass that surrounds me all the time. But thanks for your question.
Yes, there was something very interesting in your lection. You mentioned about mind, using mind to categorize music, and then you spoke about freedom, answering Sinikka. So-called freedom we have so much share in the Western worlds nowadays, and the individuality, it is not true individuality. We don't meet people anymore, really. We don't have a connection. And then what you write in your thesis in the last part 6, where I am, and actually you are talking about this belonging or individual connection with people. And so now we have been hearing so much about rhythm, meter theory and melodies, and so I want to talk about spiritual things. Because this was very touching when I was reading about this, how you felt very welcome to the folk music communities, meeting people, and you felt welcome to join the dance and play for the dance and jam and so on. And I think that is the true essence of folk music. It's a connection between people. And you mentioned in your writing essential thing, living bodies of knowledge. You saw people living bodies of knowledge, and in my world, maybe you are aware of this concept of wisdom in human being in 3 parts, that we have wisdom of mind, wisdom of body, and wisdom of heart. And I very much felt that reading this, how you felt that you were welcome into the circle of folk musicians, then you decided to stay out and pop in and pop out, not to be a tourist stealing the musical ideas, but you still didn't want to go in there. And I think there is, and you said that you were afraid of losing your identity somehow if you jump into this fully. It sounded really funny to me, because I don't think that your identity is something that is stationary and it's only built on history of yourself. But your identity is your evolving thing. And if you feel the urge to experience the folk music fully, there is nothing to be afraid. But what I'm curious is, you also mentioned seeing people dancing, and you had the sight of people dancing on the floor, and the difference between the insiders and me was the sense of belonging. And to me, this belonging to something, it includes all the mind, physics and heart. And it also affects my experience of art. If it's only affecting my mind, I don't really too much get influenced by it. It should go to heart, and also if I feel it in my body, then it's really exciting. And today in your lecture, when I saw the pieces of the music you have written, I noticed when I felt the urge to dance. When there was the first Polska part, then my body was invited to move, and I totally enjoyed the music with all of my wisdom. And my question actually is that have you allowed yourself to go in the folk music situations as dancer, dancing along, and are you aware of this, that your body can carry actually the right position of the beat? You were talking about this preciseness of the beat, but actually your body knows once you have let your body to teach you. Very unclear.
No, not at all, not at all. You touched upon so many very, very relevant points. Let's start from the last one. If there's, well, let's put it that way. One of the limitations that I see in my research is the lack of dancing, precisely. For practical reasons and for my own personal reasons. So I'm not what you would call a natural dancer. What is a natural dancer anyway? So I haven't really been having that as a part of my normal life. So it still takes quite a bit of courage for me to, move my body to the sound of any music. If it's music that has more or less conventions, so you go to a Polska lesson and it's a lesson, so you're taught how a series of movements that you might or might not use. I've done that. Not enough, not even remotely enough, but I've done that enough to understand that it wasn't enough. Going deep, as you say, deep into folk dance and even folk playing, which maybe it's even the same thing, on some level. This is something. This is one more thing to add to my list of things to do when I grow up. Something that has been perhaps overlooked during my stay in Sweden, for example, for once again another set of reasons. But it is true that the bodily knowledge, the body wisdom, I like your tripartite view of human wisdom. The wisdom that the body can do is essential, definitely. Otherwise, I become a disembodied, incomplete being. And since folk music is largely based on that, hopefully it's the unity of these three aspects that you mentioned. Maybe this was also why I didn't feel that sense of belonging, because I neglected the more immediate, even physical aspect of music making, or folk dance and music making. So thanks for reminding me of that. Regarding all the other points you raised, I wasn't really, maybe I expressed myself not so clearly in the thesis, but I wasn't really afraid that I might lose my identity if I stepped into the circle. I was merely asking myself, what happens if one is a foreigner or an outsider in any circumstance and is invited nevertheless to go in and quote-unquote integrate themselves into the new environment? What happens? I was merely asking myself the question. I don't have an answer now, because I would need to go deeper into folk music in Finland or Norway or wherever I am. I know, for example, what it means to dig down into early music, because that's where I come from, or classical music, or Italian food, or Indian food, because that's my exposure as a human being. I've had that for a long time. So I wasn't really afraid. Fear is not even a question, of course. On the contrary, I was very, very enticed. I was really, really attracted to make the final decision and say, okay, I really sit down many, many hours every week or every day, and I try to embody this knowledge with my own playing on dancing.
please? A short comment, because now I feel that you act like a missionary, that you are coming outside and seeing the great folk music, and you want to spread it to your fellow musicians outside of the genre. And maybe this is funny thought, but just I toss it out.
That's a very, very...
Yes, let me finish. That I thought that, okay, if you would be fully like into folk music, then your Baroque music friends would think, oh, he's one of the believers, don't listen to him. You need to be outsider to be creditable person widely, not only inside of your own genre.
Yeah, that's also my position. I have no idea whether I would or have become a missionary of anything, to be honest. I think it's exactly what you said about knowing what's inside the circle, and then when you step outside and you communicate with the outer world, make sure that there's still a connection to that original world. So what I mean in my thesis when I talk about stepping in inside and outside the folk music circles is that we can see that there's two polarities, okay, two possible approaches if you're an outsider to folk music. Maybe you become like Daniel Sandien-Warg, a Swedish person who has literally transplanted himself into Sätesdal, and now he speaks the language fluently. He's a believer, quote unquote. He's a tradition bearer, they say. So it is possible, and in that case, you find yourself really speaking naturally with that type of idiom. It's funny though that somebody who's clearly a tradition bearer, like Knut Hamre, this legendary fiddler, that's also quoted in my text, how he perceives himself at a very specific moment in folk music transition or even performance, where he diminishes and the music grows. This might be once again an idealized and romanticized version of it, but I think knowing Knut, he's very, very sincere in saying that he becomes a nothing. And I've always liked this quote from the book that Benedicte Mauset wrote, based on the conversations that she had with him. There is a moment for him when he performs folk music or he teaches folk music, where he becomes irrelevant. Like we can think of a drop of water that meets the ocean, and in that moment when the drop of ocean is fused with the rest of the water, it kind of loses its identity, but then it regains its new identity back from the ocean itself. It's part of a bigger drop, so to speak. So that's one polarity, one extreme approach to folk music, in my opinion. The other is musical tourism, as you mentioned. So you go to a place, you take a few pictures, and then you go back home, wherever your home is. Now, where do I stand? Of course, needless to say, somewhere in the middle. And I think I go back and forth hermeneutically, once again, back and forth between the two polarities, because I think that is my mission, if anything, or my aesthetics, my perception of myself. I am able to connect worlds, maybe that more than becoming a true expert of a specific field. And along the process, and also thanks to you, my guides through the artistic process, I've learned that this is my strength, if anything. This is my territory. This is where I can develop some sort of artistic identity. You mentioned the freedom of the mind of the listener in relation to the genre categorization, and I think also related to that, you mentioned the virtual connectedness that nowadays we have with each other, which is a good thing, but also not such a good thing if it goes to the detriment of the actual, should I say, physical or in-person sort of contact what Zygmunt Bauman defines as offline life. We have an online life and we have an offline life nowadays. And it's that connection that if it becomes an interaction, also quoting Bauman, it becomes the tool for a better society and for a better understanding of the differences. For me, navigating between musical tourism and tradition burying is always a matter of how do I see myself, how do I position myself in relation to the different, the cultural other, the Norwegian folk music tradition or the Finnish yohiko music or anything else, even Indian rhythms, whatever we're talking about. And the answer is that of civility, a beautiful term that Bauman suggests in his book. And so we can look at that way. We stand our ground, and there's differences. There's this otherness that we encounter. We have the choice of maybe acknowledging the differences, but then acting as they were not existing. So we kind of jump over them. And we're all humans. We're all equal. So it doesn't matter if we are different. I think it does matter if we are different, and it's actually fantastic if we're different. So what I normally term the globalistic attitudes to differences is one that basically nullifies differences on the grounds that since we are all humans and there's no ground to fight with each other, then everything is equal, everything is the same. And this is very well depicted by, potentially at least, by the age of internet, where everything is impalpable and not really localized, not really embodied in the old ways. I have a certain age, so I'm maybe old-fashioned. So back to civility. The other option, on the contrary, is that I acknowledge the difference between myself and the other, and the cultural other, but I explore them, I question them, and I let myself be questioned by them. In other words, I establish a dialogue with the different. It's the longer road, it's the harder work. It takes a lot of time and energy and courage. It's probably also bound to fail at some stage, and then you renegotiate, but at least you are on that path. This is what I learned in the very last phases of my research, when I was almost forced by these lovely guides that I had to reflect upon what I was doing. And this is why I'm so passionate in keeping quoting this Bauman and new kind of liquid frame of mind when living, applying that to my own music making related to musical traditions. So when civility is in place, I think, when it has been in place for me at least, concerning my relation with the folk traditions that I explored, I think the dialogue was fruitful. I learned something, and I assume something also of myself was communicated to the other. Otherwise, I just assimilate. Either I push away anthropoemic attitude, or I eat, assimilate, absorb, and digest the other in order to make it as myself, another copy of myself, anthropophagic sort of approach. In the middle, I think there is this idea of civility, or quoting actually Dr. Thompson here, intercultural interaction, intercultural humility. Am I right? Thank you. So it's the same, for me it's the same concept of being engaged as much as possible without hierarchy or dominance. Just, we are here for the same purpose, and let's see what happens. Hope it doesn't sound too vague to you.
Thank you, very thorough answer. I'm very happy. Thank you.
I tend to digress a lot, I'm very sorry about that.
So, dear Krishna, you are going to be, by doing the doctoral kind of degree and thesis and all these tests of proficiency, you are becoming a kind of expert of hybridity as well. And I would like to ask you, do you have any example where you think that, or what kind of features you find related to hybridity that, or intergenre, that would be compromising or inconvincing artistically or ethically? Or can you give us an example where you would think that, okay, well, this is somehow unsettling, or that you feel squeamish about that?
Yes, I think so. I can take some examples from my own experience as an observer more than anybody who participated in those experiments. I can give you two orders of examples. One is taken from our common field, Baroque music. So as you very well know, I guess everybody knows, there has been a tendency in the last couple of decades on behalf of Baroque musicians to look somewhere else for sources of inspiration, for example, towards folk music. I know quite a few people who try to incorporate folk music elements, especially from Ireland and Scotland, but also from Poland or from other much more distant traditions, like Middle Eastern, or people who experiments who've been in where the crossover happened between Baroque and jazz, between Baroque and gospel. So it's, I don't want to sound too blunt, but it's kind of trendy these days. Nothing wrong with that, once again. It depends on how you do it. And more often than not, speaking specifically about the mixture between folk elements and Baroque elements, I witnessed a certain lack of knowledge of the folk element. The same term, folk Baroque, which I very guiltily used myself, even in my own master's thesis. I say that openly. I don't like this term anymore. Because in the first place, if you think about it, there is an underlying assumption that as a Baroque musician, you're folk Baroque. So you're first folk and then Baroque. No. You're still, at least speaking for myself, I was still largely standing my Baroque ground and then incorporating folk elements. So it should be Baroque folk, to be quite honest. But this is maybe just pedantry on behalf of a hopefully soon to be doctoral person. But nevertheless, this is one very revealing detail of the mentality that sometimes I encountered. The other side of the coin is that more often than not, especially with my own group, Brew, we've been very well received in the Baroque music world, but as something exotic, which is once again can be nice. But it kind of belittles the amount of work that you put into that thing. I'm speaking about my own example, but there's heaps of people, even here in this very hall, and they know who they are, who have been trying to join the two forces with a lot of work, and being asked and being considered I'm going to be politically very incorrect here. Being considered the folk musician that then can, play outside in the open air. Doesn't matter if it rains, but if you're a Baroque musician, then you've got to have a church, and you need to be treated with all respects. This is not where I want to be, and I've seen that happen, sadly. On another, rather different aspect, I was referring earlier to the very intriguing word of global music, and I myself am a graduate of the global music degree, which is something that probably was one of the most life-changing experiences in my life. Yet I see that the danger with the approach to differences, as we were commenting a minute ago, is the globalism. For me, any ism entails a little bit of activity. It becomes a system. It becomes a sort of an ideology. And once again, there's nothing inherently wrong with the ideologies, but in this case, I find that the result that we're witnessing also in our non-musical life is that of, it doesn't really matter, everything is the same, so we just smile to each other and don't really smile and. We just smile. It's better than, pushing the other way, of course. But I wonder whether the mixture of different elements, on which level it happens, how much of the intercultural humility is really enhanced and encouraged. For example, there was one instance ages ago at a music festival in one Nordic country where I was working as a volunteer, and one of the projects, it wasn't my own project, I was the contact person for artists, but not for those artists. So one of the highlights of the festival was putting together people, musicians, like it was maybe 4 or 5 people coming from different musical genres and places in the world. So they were put together in 3-4 days, and that was it. So make music. Of course, they came up with something that in the end was fantastic, because their musicianship is just incredible. The instruments that they played were incredible, and to some extent they really managed to have a dialogue with each other. But what can you do in 3 days? It takes a lot of work. I'm not saying that I myself am the missionary or the proof that it works. On the contrary, I'm still pretty much in the middle of the field. By no means I want to judge or preach anything, but I have the strong feeling that if we're not careful, we will incur in this problem. Differences are so, I'm talking about, of course, positive differences, like qualities, let's say, are so beautiful, and variety is so typical of our age, and I think that's the playground. That's where we need to start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, this is kind of a sports question after a ball game or cross-country competition or something, but according to this neat little thoughtful poem you used in the beginning of the thesis by Mercado, the footsteps are drawn for you, but are there any footsteps that you in retrospect regret haven't taken, and if so, what would you have done different in this journey that probably ends today?
How much time do you have? I am notoriously somebody who ruminates about the past quite a lot, and I shall try to be as succinct as possible. Yes, there are more than regrets, things that I learned from, very many and very much. Some of them have already been mentioned. For example, the approach to dance that I felt was a bit more needed in my case. One more thing that I forgot to comment upon, I think it was Dr. Kyhala maybe that mentioned it. Anyways, the blending of the performing and the composing aspect. So as my supervisors know very well, I am quite reticent in seeing myself as a performer, despite the fact that yes, I have recorded my own music. I had no other choice for practical reasons, but it was a nice discovery. I know I can do it. So this is also something that I would have liked to experiment more with. Maybe to the expense of the amount of time that I spent investigating musicological aspects of the research, or maybe thanks to a better time and energy and resource managing. But yeah, secondly speaking, more of the composer-performer figure, which was also so normal in Baroque times. And we kind of lost it along the way, and I think we should all work to bring it back if we can. That's the second thing, and there is something about the order of my concerts that was due to technical reasons, but is not quite right. I would have preferred to have the third concert in the first place, so the more musicological exploration of the roots of the Polska. and then the exploration of the different countries. There was something else, yes, improvisation. So talking about the improvisatory aspect of folk music making, that's something that was very briefly touched in the first concert, and that was abandoned. So that's also something I could have done a bit more. Also continuing on the artistic side, I think, not to repeat the same thing that we said with Maestro Virta Perko once again, but I do regret not writing more music of my own. I could easily have devoted the time that I spent writing the Swedish Suite in Baroque style by writing one more of my own pieces. But I discovered that later. Maybe it was still necessary in the process, I don't know, but I completely agree with Maestro Virta Perko when he said that folk baroque experiments, or period composing, as is termed by Bruce Haynes in The End of Early Music, to me it makes sense in a way. It made sense at the beginning of my artistic process, but it very soon ceased to have any meaning, and still I perpetuated that for an entire term. So that's maybe one of the biggest regrets that I have. I'm trying to think if there's anything on the research, on the merely research side of my project that I could have done better. Yeah, that's quite a few things. Especially, okay, this is quite a thick book. There's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of scores, so all in all, the number of words is not so intimidating. It took a long time to write it and to conceive it, but it could have started earlier. So I started writing the thesis and reflecting upon what I was doing, so making cognitive what was intuitive, quite late in my research. And that is the reason why, for example, I didn't really dig into Bauman's philosophy until you suggested it, or I didn't really learn about the many implications of the Werktreue, the artwork problem in classical music, before Dr. Vehviläinen once suggested me that I read Liedegger's The Imaginary Museum of Musical Works. It wasn't until I had to do it, I forced myself into it almost, that I read that folk and art music are in fact categories that were created not by the folk, by the way, at all. So they came into the intellectual discussion much, reasonably recently, honestly. All of these things need time to be elaborated, to be articulated in your own understanding, and they need time to be unpacked. And I feel like right now, in many of these respects, especially in the intersections, in the discourse about liquid modernity, in the discourse about the interconnectedness of the fields of culture, I'm still a newcomer. So there's a lot to explore, and it's the excuse to prepare this very defense has become a highly interesting moment for me to explore these directions, and I feel like I want to do more in that direction, if possible. So the project ends today, but also starts today in a way, with your help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Krishna,
yes.
I was very fascinated about your plan and idea of traveling to Poland.
Yeah, that's another thing I regret, by the way.
Yeah. And now I have a little question, and you can answer yes or no, and I have a hope about the answer, but I don't say it. And also, are you still one day going to travel to Poland to research the Polska roots?
That's my hope. Dr. Conti refers to the fact that in my very original plan, I had in mind to go to Poland on a field trip, because I have contacts in the folk music scene there, and also in the musicological scene, people who have studied the Polish style, both on art music and on a folk music perspective, and I wanted to go there and learn the music and do a field trip. I think the need for it is slightly lessened these days because during my research I read literature that is just about that, and there is hardly any research gap that I can cover there, right? On a purely theoretical level, because you mentioned to investigate the origins of the Polska. I think that's done. There's still a lot of debate, but that's not my area of expertise. I'm not, unless I want to turn into a musicologist, maybe that's not exactly what I want to do. But still, the other aspect, so the embodiment of that, is probably going to happen. It has happened to some extent in the past years because I had the luxury to play in Warsaw every summer at a festival with a baroque group from Italy. And every time I make sure, even next August I'm going there, so every time I make sure that I visit some folk music concerts, both with my own friends and random folk music concerts, because there's quite a lively scene in Warsaw. And even going there and watching people dance and trying to figure out how they navigate those rhythms. And those rhythms are wild, are really, really, really incredibly, even more complex than what I learned on that fiddle. So the desire to know more about that is definitely there. Maybe next August I will make sure that I stay some extra days to dig more into that. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Also, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick comments.
Yeah.
Rhythms are difficult as long as you are using your mind to understand the rhythms. As long as you start to listen to your wisdom of your body, they become natural.
It would be ideal to join. Yeah. It would be ideal to. We're all trying to, be as wholesome as possible, and even more than that, to be holistic. So the sum of the part is larger than the part than themselves. The result is larger than that. But yes, an ideal bridge between the wisdom of the mind, the wisdom of the body, and the wisdom of the heart. And I think there's even more levels we can examine. I think that's a good thing to aim for in life and in cultural production especially. So thanks for the comment.
I have another question.
Yes.
Is there, you had this certain problem with the fourth concert and Vegard Vårdal. Is there something you learned about this? What was the main reasons, and have you analyzed later on what were the real reasons for the conflict?
Yes, there's many lessons that I've learned from that experience. Probably the biggest lesson is that piece is difficult to play. So whenever when I had to play my own music, my own piece, a piece that I didn't write having myself in mind, even if I was largely writing the piece with my instrument in my hands, in that moment I learned that stylistically it's strangely difficult even for me. Technically it's hard to keep it together as a whole. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who, like Vegard, took the trouble to try and realize something that's that wasn't immediately in his own area of expertise. So he took a huge leap in doing what he did. So I'm very grateful for that. I guess the most valuable lesson I learned was I think it was very, very well framed by a comment that Professor Ilmonen had uttered during the feedback after the last concert. She said that it became clear to her when I was playing the last movement of the suite, because I had to do it at the concert live. It became clear to her what that music really meant, so that the idiom with which the piece was being communicated to the audience was a lot clearer. And my music deserved me as a performer. I'm probably sort of translating what you said, but I think that was the overall sense of your statement. And that was surprisingly difficult for me to accept, because I still have problems in acknowledging the fact that I can play my own music. So that's maybe the biggest lesson that I learned. And throughout the very intense process of preparation of the recording, so while I was practicing the piece, I don't think I've ever practiced anything as much as I have practiced my own suite. I understood my music better. So what does it tell me? It tells me that, once again, composing music is fine, and being just a composer, of course, is fine, especially if you're writing for orchestras. You can't really play all the instruments. But if you're writing for solo instruments, and if you have the luxury of being a performer and a composer, maybe you should take into consideration joining the two aspects more often, because, as folk musicians tell us all the time, there's nobody who, like the actual source of the knowledge, to disseminate the knowledge, probably. I don't know if you will agree on that. I mean, you're more entitled to express your opinion, since you're more folk musicians than I am.
I might just comment on the whole issue, that it's actually very interesting to place yourself as a composer in this position of Crossroads. You can kind of say that, okay, I'm kind of in between these influences and these traditions, but what actually happens when you start doing it? There a lot happens. I mean, this discussion with Olli and you about the kind of dominance of the metric things and the rhythmic things, and the simplicity of harmony, which comes directly from the Polska tradition and the folk music tradition, where the melody is the king, the harmony is not so important. So how far can you stretch that actually without becoming something else totally? And where is the liminality? What are the borders of the liminality when you are actually in between traditions? One other aspect, I think, was the danceability, which I kind of started wondering when we saw here the orchestrated suits. I mean, that kind of early music, classical music, it's also very danceable, but in a very different way than folk music. So I was wondering, is it possible to live in the same moment these two traditions of, let's say, the danceability of folk music or Polska, which is very, very grounded, kind of horizontal, very like gazon, sitkeä, stretchy, and kind of stretchy and physical, with a lot of pelvis involved, and the classical danceability with a lot of horizontal. I feel it very horizontal, very kind of limb driven and mind driven danceability. Very different characters of danceabilities. What happens if you try to compose in between these? Can you incorporate both of them, or does one override the other? And I feel it's the same issue here with the danceability and with the harmony versus other musical materials. If you take on something else, it kind of eats up something else. Definitely, you can't have everything. How do you deal with this situation?
I probably don't. No, but jokes apart, I have a couple of points. For example, you mentioned the question that I also uttered in my lecture: how far can we stretch a musical item? For example, a folk music element. How far can we stretch its boundaries before it becomes something else? But right now, I argue, is there a break point? Where is that? Or isn't it like a Schrödinger breakpoint? So it's there, but it isn't really. I don't really know, because it seems to me that, of course, if you take into account the starting point and the end point of something that breaks, like a line that's broken, you have for example, the short 1, 2, 3 pattern, okay, in Polska dancing. And if you stretch the 2 long enough, or if you inflate one of the other beats of the bar, you end up at a certain point having the other type of asymmetry. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But these are the extremes. I don't really know where we can place the slider, like the border between the two. But this is a very special case. In general, of course, since we are dealing with approximations, there should be breakpoints. And why not? I mean, then it becomes something else, and it might be actually very interesting to see what happens, what it becomes after being a folk element that's been contaminated, to use Bartok's terminology, and then it goes on to becoming something else, like in the fantastic Escher drawing that I mentioned. The second very, very short thing is maybe your idea of lightness, of almost to the point of being disembodied of Baroque music, is our own fault. Because I don't know if Dr. Kartonen agrees with me, but there is an element of intellectualism in the way we approach early music that should probably be integrated with a bit more of what you call being, you use terms like...
pelvis.
Ground.
Yes, grounded, thank you very much, grounded. It's dance. Of course, it's more formalized, it's another type of aesthetic, but I think they do have something very earthy and very common.
Yeah. And isn't it so that it's also up to the listener who is interpreting how we hear material? I hear it like this, but the other person might hear it very differently.
Yeah, so I mean, to answer your question, I think that should be probably realized at the level of the performance more than on the composition, also because it's difficult to join a style that's, well, dead. Baroque people are sadly no more with us, and the style that they had is of course still present, but in my opinion, it's still too anachronistic to me now that I have gone through the process to reenact yet another folk Baroque experiment. So I think it's more of a question, for me, would be more of a question of how I embody those different styles in a more grounded way when I perform, or when I perform my own arrangements or my own pre-existing folk Baroque literature, I think.
So, on the grounds of the thesis and the discussion heard today, we, me and Asi, propose that the thesis is accepted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Music.
On the grounds of the statements and the discussion heard today, the Artistic Committee proposes that the artistic demonstration of proficiency is accepted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Music.
Esteemed thesis examiners and artistic committee, I am deeply honored to receive your approval and acceptation of my doctoral degree, and to be included in the community of musical doctors. My own footsteps might have brought me here today, but they were wisely and kindly guided by your advice from the very beginning of this life-changing process up to the present day. For this, I am thankful more than formal words can tell. Thank you very much. And after this, I recommend that those esteemed persons in the audience today who might have critical comments on my doctoral demonstration of proficiency ask the chair for the floor. Thank you.
As there appears to be no further comments, the examination is now about to reach its end. Esteemed artistic committee and thesis examiners, dear audience, thank you for participating in this doctoral defense event. The public examination has now ended.